It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. These pictures of immigration raids have been released by the Home Office. Will they dissuade people from coming to the UK illegally?
Let's just stand up and say no to death taxes, full stop. End death taxes. They're wrong, they're immoral at every level.
Reform UK supports farmers as they descend on Westminster again. Will the government back down? Health Minister Andrew Gwynn has been sacked over offensive messages. Will a second Labour MP, who was part of the same WhatsApp group, be sanctioned? And the French president releases this deep-fake video of himself to warn of the risks and opportunities of artificial intelligence. Joining us today, Labour MP Natasha Irons, Conservative MP Lewis Cocking, The Observer's Sonia Soda and Sunday Telegraph columnist Zoe Strimple. This is Politics Live. Now, as we saw in the headlines just then, we have been given pictures by the Home Office showing a blitz of immigration raids at the start of the year. They are in various places of work. The government says it's a record-breaking surge in raids on illegal working, places like nail bars, convenience stores, restaurants and car washes, which they say led to over 800 arrests in January, a 73% rise on last year. So let's start with that. And my opening question to the panel, first of all, to Natasha. Will these kind of pictures persuade people not to come to the UK? Presumably that is the thinking behind putting them out there.
Well, I think there's two reasons for this. I think, yes, we need to, the biggest deterrent we can have for people coming here illegally or working here illegally is to show that you won't get away with it. That's the biggest deterrent we can offer. But I think also we need to show the public our workings on this. They've had a lot of promises in the past around controlling our borders, controlling legal migration, and showing that we are being serious and we're going through the process of ensuring we've got enough caseworkers to process the cases, enough enforcement officers to go out and do these raids. I think we'll show people are working on what's going on.
Lewis, do you agree with that?
Well, look, these people shouldn't even be in the United Kingdom, full stop. I mean, we've got to have a credible deterrent. The National Crime Agency, until the Labour government get a credible deterrent, like our Rwanda scheme that they have scrapped, these people will not stop coming to the country illegally. I mean, we're debating this afternoon in Parliament their new immigration bill, which actually allows people who've come here illegally to be within touching distance and able to get British citizenship. And that should be off the cards completely to anyone who comes here illegally.
Can I just come back on that?
We'll come back to that in just one second. I just want to get the views of the rest of the panel. What do you make of these pictures? Is this something you were expecting from this government?
I mean, I can see why the government are trying this approach. Unfortunately, I think the evidence suggests that deterrent effects don't work. If people really, really want to come to the UK and they're determined in a way that means they're paying people thousands of pounds, they're risking their lives to cross the channel, I don't really think that videos like this work. As to the Rwanda scheme, I mean, there was absolutely no evidence that was going to work as well. The Conservatives planned on deporting a tiny, tiny fraction of people who come here illegally to Rwanda and wasted millions and millions of pounds on it. So I don't think that Labour should be taking any lessons from the Conservatives on what effective deterrence looks like.
Zoe, do you think this is the right thing to do, to show people that the law is being enforced?
Well, I mean, this is a tiny, tiny, it's not even a splash in the ocean. It's like a little tiny piece of theatre, window dressing theatre. I agree entirely with Sonia. I think the whole rationale behind risking everything to come here, which so many people are willing to do, this sort of thing. I mean, it's never been completely okay to be an illegal. I don't think it's going to make any difference. I suppose my problem with this whole raft of measures that are supposed to, crack down and get tough and stuff, is that none of it really gets at the incoherence at the heart of the entire immigration policy, which is that it's not clear what, legal migrants are supposed to do to get here. And there should be an asylum system for those who need to come, who can't necessarily do the paperwork. So how do we have an asylum system that is humane, but also isn't taken advantage of? I think the other thing is that the PR for migration has become so overtaken by Farage's agenda. And the genuine problems that have come from, the way we handle it without vetting migrants properly, without deporting, so that in people's minds, migration is just a bad thing. It's become a kind of evil, and I think that's just as much of the problem.
OK, let's now welcome the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Your party mentioned there. What do you make of the Home Office putting out these pictures showing that people who are here and working illegally, that something will happen to them? Presumably you welcome that.
Well, good afternoon. Yes, I mean, something's better than nothing. But when you break these numbers down, it's really pretty pathetic. This makes about 20 arrests a day. If I had the powers, I could arrest 20 illegal workers in Boston, in my constituency, every single day. I mean, this crisis is off the charts. And look, the issue of immigration is of critical concern to the majority of the British people. It's not just people who vote Reform. It's the number one issue because it's out of control, both illegal and legal, and it's impacting on everybody's lives. It's suppressing wages. It's leading to huge illegality. If I ordered 50 fast food deliveries here in central London, I would think about 20 to 25 of them every single day would be carried out by illegal workers. The situation.
So what would you do about that? What would you do about that?
I would detain them and deport them without hesitation. You cannot be here illegally and expect to work and expect to get away with it.
That's what this is all about. I mean, the Home Office is saying they have ramped
that should be a cross-party consensus.
It is a cross-party, isn't it?
Natasha?
That's exactly what the government is doing. This is an increase of 48% year on year of people being deported who shouldn't be working here. And I don't think that, the thing that's suppressing wages is immigration necessarily. What that is not putting up our national minimum wage, which something is that your party didn't support. I think what we're looking at here is a reappropriation of that £700 million worth of money that was going to Rwanda actually going to clearing up the system. We have an immigration system that wasn't working because we were spending money on a headline-grabbing thing that was never going to work, and instead we're just doing the graft. 16,000 people been deported that shouldn't have been here. We're going into businesses that shouldn't be employing people and sorting that out. And a lot of the things in the Conservative sort of new plan as things that already exist. You can already lose your citizenship. And they should know that because that's legislation that's been in place since 2002, but they've just refused to implement it. So our best deterrence is having an immigration system that works, so that if you're here, you shouldn't be here.
Small boat crossings are up 30% since July.
The only way we're going to...
But let's talk about people who are here working illegally when they shouldn't be. Richard Tice, you were nodding along there. You think the government's going down the right track now, do you?
Well, look, first of all, the contributor just said that, quite rightly, the Rwanda scheme was an absolute farce, a waste of time, effort and money. It was never going to be a deterrent. And I wish the Home Secretary and the Home Office well in carrying out the existing rules on illegal working. So I just want them to move further, faster, more effectively, because the size and the scale of this is so enormous. And it is suppressing British wages because lots of people who used to do fast food deliveries, for example, have now given up because their wages have been suppressed by illegal workers renting sub-accounts from the likes of Deliveroo, Just Eats, Uber Eats and the likes. They'll all deny it, but this is what's going on. And so British workers' wages are being suppressed by illegal working. I've got first-hand evidence on it, and it's about time the Home Office grasp it and stop it.
Richard, I think the response to that, though, is to ensure that we make sure businesses are behaving appropriately, that we stop people coming here illegally, but clamp down on those businesses that do that. So I think the government has got an approach at the moment when you look at our link between immigration and workforce, so that we ensure that, yes, if you need to have people come here to work, your company does that, but we have to leverage that talent to train up our own talent so we get people into jobs that are from here. I want my children to be able to have the opportunities that they have as they grow up. And the only way we do that is to work in partnership with business to ensure we leverage those skills to train up our people. That's what the government is working towards and doing. That's how we ensure that net migration comes down over the long term without cutting off our nose to spite our face. We have to train people up, and that's what we're doing.
So, Sonia, there's some agreement there between the government and Richard Tice.
Yeah, evidently. I mean, I think there is consensus around people who are here illegally and working illegally. I've not really seen anyone kind of make the case for that. So it's not entirely surprising. Perhaps where there may be more disagreement, certainly between me and Richard Tice, is when you're talking about legal migration. Richard Tice said that that's out of control. I actually think politicians need to have a really honest conversation with the public, which is we've got an ageing society that presents immense long-term fiscal challenges. So, you know, you need to pay, working people are going to have to pay more and more tax in order to support the same level of NHS services. There aren't easy efficiencies there. So you either put your own birth rate up, which no rich country has really succeeded in doing, or you have skilled immigration, which actually can boost economic growth and mean that people here have to pay less tax to support the same services. Now, it doesn't seem to me like any politician is willing to... There's a trade-off here. We've got to be honest about it. No politician is being honest about that.
Richard, you're not being honest about the trade-offs.
There's no trade-off at all. Look at the evidence. In the 1980s, when we had net immigration of about 30 to 50,000 every year, people were getting older, and guess what? We were training up our own British workers, our own healthcare and social care workers, and people were getting older, but everybody was being looked after. It worked well then. What you actually need to do is if you limit the supply of labour, one of two things happens. The price of the labour goes up, and yes, I'm very happy for the price of labour to go up. That's a great thing for workers on low pay. Or businesses invest in capital equipment to replace the labour that they can no longer afford. That's literally basic rule number one on economics. And this idea you can permanently increase the supply of the population. They all get older. Everybody gets older.
But the thing that's very different between
Richard, just let
now and
Sonia come back on that.
1980s is that the birth rate has fallen. And that is something that politicians are not being honest about. If you have an ageing population, which means that your population structure is shifting to a greater proportion of retirement age, and you've got fewer working age people, that has shifted significantly since the 1980s, that does create a conundrum, which is young people in their teens and 20s today, in 30 years, you either have to say, we're not going to have the same level of health services, we're not going to have the same level of care for older people, which is personally not something I want to see, or you're putting a burden on those young people to pay more tax, which, you know, you've got to be honest about this, Richard, and other politicians do too. There is a cost to cutting migration in the long term, and it is higher. There absolutely is. This is basic economics that you're not getting right. And that cost is higher taxes for young people who are in their teens and 20s today.
Right, Richard?
Absolute twaddle.
It's not. I mean, it's not twaddle, but you know.
Life expectancy is no longer going up. It's flatlined. The retirement age is going up.
I'm talking about the birth rate, Richard. There's links between the birth rate and a falling birth rate in the UK and other rich nations, ageing societies, and a big long-term fiscal crunch that's coming down the line. That it's not just a reform problem. No politician seems to want to talk about.
Richard, do you want to come back on that?
If you have a stable population, and you grow the economy, then everybody gets better off. At the moment, we've got a rapidly growing population and no growth, and everybody's getting poorer, and that cannot be sustainable.
Lewis, so basically no one's being honest about this.
Well, no, we've set out our policy on immigration. We want that significantly to come down. I heard loud and clear on the doorsteps at the general election in my constituency of Broxbourne that people are fed up with the levels of immigration. You can't get your child into the school you want. There's real pressure on getting GP surgeries, appointments. So what we've got to do is we've got a large section of the population that left the workforce during the COVID pandemic. We've got to encourage them, make work pay, upskill them and get them back into the workforce. We don't necessarily need immigration to do that. We've got people here who are economically inactive, who we need to encourage back to the workplace, because the best form of welfare in this country is a well-paid job.
Zoe, can
I see all this a little bit differently, which is that I don't understand the kind of passion about, OK, it's illegal work, therefore it's bad. But at least it's work, it's economic activity, people who are getting here and they are hustling, which seems to me...
maybe they're not paying taxes.
Yeah, OK, they're not paying taxes in this generation. OK, I just think there are a couple of branching... there are a couple of avenues that happen when you get completely unvetted illegal migration. One is that they hunker down and start plotting terrorism. That's one of the things that I would be afraid of. People who come from countries that have, ideologies that they're more prey to certain extremist thinking, perhaps. I don't know, cultural differences. Obviously, most migrants are not doing that, but that is clearly one thing people are worried about is people from countries that aren't vetted who plot terrorism. That's a small, tiny, tiny amount. The other is that they get stuck in, become economically active, hustle, 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 deliver people's Deliveroo, and then get a foothold in society. And if they aren't deported, they can start to become, economic contributors. The other thing is that, people say, oh, poor British workers are squeezed out of all of this. To some degree, that might be. But is it really the case that there are so many British workers who are desperate to be doing these jobs and they're being literally prevented from doing so by the this illegal workforce who's willing to work for less and so on and so forth, and all this sort of we must lure them into economic activity? Is there not a bit of a cultural issue with people not seeking out work? I mean, work should be an end, working is good for morale, good for supporting your family, good for all sorts of reasons. Why is there this reluctance to work? Why do we need to put on hold all these other things in order to desperately persuade economically inactive Brits to work? This seems to be a much deeper cultural problem that has nothing to do with people coming to Britain and delivering Deliveroo.
I think dealing with the economically inactive in this country is a crucial thing, and that's why the government is putting forward plans to deal with that. I think ensuring that work pays is also something that is critical to this, because there's no point people on poverty wages not being able to keep food in their stomach and a roof over their head. Work has to be able to sustain your life, and it isn't just about pay, it's about feeling good about yourself and contributing to society. I think this government's approach to migration, linking it to the skills that we need in this country, and as I said, leveraging that talent to train up our workforces so that you're not just economically inactive, you are able to see how you can contribute to this country. I think that is vital to the future of how we do these things. And I think it's vital to how we solve a lot of the problems that we have here.
And let's have a little look at odds with migration.
Let's have a little look here at a couple of things here. The politics of this, really. Look, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, talking about this here. I'll ban migrants who claim benefits from becoming UK citizens, announcing a new policy, even though she said she wasn't going to do any new policies. And then look at this one here. Labour hits 5-year high in migrant removals. Now, lots of people have commented on this advert because it's done in the colours of Richard Tice's Reform UK party. Isn't the truth here to both of you? Reform is on the up. They are ahead in the polls, certainly of the Conservatives in many of them, and they're not far off the Labour polling. Aren't you both worried about what they present and the fact that they are taking votes off you potentially?
So I think for us, this was in our manifesto. This was something we were already talking about because it was something we already acknowledged was a concern for the population. So it's not new news to us. I'm not squeamish about the Labour Party telling people that we've returned a higher number than the Conservatives did over the last 5 years, and that's in the first 7 months of a Labour government. I'm not squeamish about talking about that at all, because that's a government being effective. I think for the Conservative Party, sort of regurgitating and taking the failed policies of the last 14 years and putting them on steroids, whether that's through reform or for them, I don't think that really helps anybody, because we've seen it just doesn't work.
Richard, you come back, because I know you've got to leave. So what do you make to that?
Well, I'm pleased that the Labour Party has been reading the reform contract and is now adopting our
Haven't you dropped
language
it?
about
Do you still have that contract? I thought you cancelled it.
It's a critically important thing. I think at the end of the day, work is a good thing. It's good for your dignity. It's good for your family. It's a great example to your children. We should all be able to agree on that. We've got to make work pay, make it worthwhile, and then we can have a more prosperous nation.
OK, we'll let Richard go. He's got to get off to something else. Thank you very much for joining us. Lewis, back to you and what your party's doing here. I mean, the truth is that you had years to deal with this issue and you didn't. And as the government would say today, well, they've gone into these places of work. They're starting to deport more people than you were doing.
Well, look, we did make mistakes when we were in government. Kemi's held our hand up and said sorry a number of times on immigration. As I said, it was the most important issue on the doorsteps in my constituency. And on this thing about reform threat, look, every other political party is a threat to the Conservative Party. In 2019, when we had the European election, I think we came 5th in the national poll. Less than 6 months later, we won the general election with the biggest majority since Thatcher. So a lot can change.
You're not worried about
a lot can change in politics. Look, a lot can change in politics over time. Another example, in the 2019 general election, who'd have sat here today and said Labour were going to win the next general election and have a majority of over 100? A day is a long time in politics. Of course, we need to take the threat from every political party, Labour and Reform, seriously, and we will work tirelessly to win back the trust of the British people.
Sonia, just quickly, is Reform, are they a threat to the two main parties, as they would be
They are. That's what the polling
That's
shows.
what's driving this, do you think, on this focus on immigration?
Of course it is to some extent. You know, it's a fact, I think, that the public is saying they care about immigration in the polls. But of course, both parties are looking over their shoulder at Reform doing well in the polls. I think, actually, if you look at some of the polling and seat-by-seat analysis, they're probably more of a threat to the Conservatives than the Labour Party at the moment. But there are,
Well,
things
I wouldn't agree with that.
Well, there's a lot of seats where Reform did come second to Labour.
But I think for both parties, there are MPs, if there were a general election tomorrow and people vote as they're saying they would in the polls, there are MPs in both parties who would lose their seats to Reform. My thing would be, I'm quite worried about the state of politics at the moment because I feel like there are some very difficult, intractable issues, including the state of the economy, the sluggish productivity growth we've had for the last 40 years that no party has addressed, including things like small boat arrivals, where I'm afraid I don't think there's a lot of evidence that the government of the day can do much to deter people. Unfortunately, I think we've got a politics where politicians say, no, listen, we're the ones who can fix that. And then they don't deliver. And then you get parties like Nigel Farage's Reform doing well off the back of that. It's difficult, but I would like to see a bit more honesty from our politicians about some of these problems, saying, look, these are 40-year issues when it comes to the economy, and it's not something we can fix in 3 years. That's not really the politics of today, though.
Also, it'd be good to be able to join things up again, to make things more coherent. I think this issue of what we do with illegal migrants and whether a few of them are, apprehended and or deported gets to a much bigger uncertainty and problem and fissure within British society, which is to do with law and order in total. There's a sense that there is anarchy in some places on the streets, that phone thefts are just completely unpunished. Story after story after story of people reporting crimes, including massive thefts, fraud to the police who literally say, we will not do anything. It's more like DIY policing, but you could do this to protect yourself. So I think there's a sense that how does the rule of law get enforced in this country? Who gets held to it? Who doesn't? Is it random? Is there a police force there to support the laws of this land? And I think the migrant issue is just one piece in that much bigger puzzle that has completely come unstuck.
OK, thank you for that. Let's just have a quick look now at these latest pictures, which are of farmers protesting. They've reached central London, I think we can see there, coming in on their tractors, obviously protesting about the increase in inheritance tax that was levied on them in the budget. And this afternoon, MPs will be debating a petition which is being signed by 148,000 people, urging the government to exempt working farms from the tax. Natasha, is the government going to give way on this?
I don't think it is. I think this policy, I totally understand where the concerns may be, but this is about trying to bring a bit of fairness into this system. Allowing people to have to be able to pass down £3 million worth of assets to their families to protect their farms. I think it's fine. I think that the key thing for this government is trying to, where that concern is around the income of farms and how they pay that over the long term. And our job as government is to ensure that farms can make a living and can be viable. Again, that's why we want to ensure that any procurement of food going to our our army bases or our prisons is coming from British farms. We want to ensure they are at the front of the queue when it comes to that procurement. It's also about not selling them out to dodgy trade deals. It's about ensuring that we keep our food standards and make sure that they're protected. We're lining up to get our veterinary agreement done with the EU for our farmers. So I think it's about protecting their future income so that they can feel secure in how that goes forward.
So, Lewis, for lots of farmers, they will be able to pass on £3 million. So lots of people will say that's pretty generous.
The NFU reckon the government's got their sums wrong on this, the Treasury's got their sums wrong. They're not opening to listening. I think this is a disastrous policy, and it's just a number of policies, whether it be this or house building. They have definitely got a war, Labour, with rural England, and they do not like farmers. Keir Starmer looked farmers in the eye before the general election and said he had no plans to change any of this. It wasn't in their manifesto, and then he'd done it anyway. They've basically got elected, thrown their manifesto in the bin, and say we're just going to do whatever we want to do. It's going to have massive ramifications for food production in this country, and it will destroy hundreds, if not thousands, of family farms.
I think
just
to say, if it's a bit rich, really, from a previous government that didn't spend £300 million. It had earmarked for family farms and didn't spend a penny of that. It's a bit rich coming from a party where
we're not destroying family farms.
Saw 12,000 farms and agricultural businesses close under your your leadership. So it is a bit rich, and it's also a bit rich to kind of sell out our farmers to trade deals that were never going to benefit them. When we had last time we had tractors going down Whitehall, it's because of those deals that the previous government did. So I think we have to protect their income in the future, because these need to be viable businesses that then can protect our food standards. That's why the government's putting over £2 billion back into the farming businesses. That is the biggest increase in sustainable farming.
That's not what farmers are telling me. I haven't met one single farmer that agrees with this policy. I mean, I had boundary changes at the last general election, so I've got now farms in my constituency that would have had a Labour MP, and this whole talk around Labour MPs going out around the country speaking to farmers that are happy with this. I said, well, if you were in your previous constituency, would you be happy with this policy? They said, no, don't be silly, Lewis. Of course we wouldn't. So this will destroy family farms, and it would destroy British-grown products in the supermarket.
But are you in favour of the government investing over £2 billion into sustainable farming?
I'm not in favour of this policy.
I'm asking about the sustainable farming, the sustainable farming investment this government is making, so we can protect our food standards, but also ensure that family farms, all farms, are productive and have an income that they can live off of. Because that's what this government's doing.
With this policy, there will be no family farms left.
You know full well that the people that make, the vast majority of people that make these claims will not be impacted. You also know that the NFU have based their figures on people that don't get the tax exemptions from this. So our investment in ensuring that farmers can have an income in the future, doesn't the Conservative Party want to see farms become financially viable?
There will be no family farms left under this policy.
I mean, it won't affect a lot of farms.
75% of commercial family farms, the NFU have said that it's going to affect.
As I've said, they're not including
it's going to be
exemptions.
devastating for rural England.
I mean, I think it's an exaggeration to say that this policy destroys family farms in the UK. I think where there is a point, I think the government is absolutely right to go after wealthy people who are buying of farms, the agricultural exemption, to avoid paying inheritance tax and leaving people who are less wealthy than to pay up. That's wrong. I think the problem with this policy is it's quite badly targeted. So there are people who are avoiding inheritance tax using this exemption who won't be caught up by this policy, and there are genuine family farms that would be. And actually the tax expert Dan Needle has come up with an alternative proposition, which is essentially that you leave things as they are, but you say that if you sell the farm on, then the inheritance tax is levied. And what that does is it gets at people who are using it as an exemption. So I'd like to see the Treasury refine the policy along those lines.
OK, let's have a look at this, which has been making a lot of headlines over the weekend. This appeared today, but it's a follow-up from yesterday from the Mail on Sunday. This is about a WhatsApp group which was set up by the now former Health Minister Andrew Gwynn. Lots of unpleasant things said on it. He has been sacked or has lost his job and been suspended from the Labour Party. And then today there is talk of another MP who's been involved in all of this, and our political correspondent Ian Watson can explain to us exactly what has been going on here, Ian.
Yeah, well, what went on initially, Vicky, was that the Mail on Sunday obtained these messages. They've gone through thousands of messages in a WhatsApp group of which Andrew Gwynn was a member. The Labour Party took swift action against him. Just if anyone has not read these, just to give you a very brief flavour of them, he was mocking a pensioner, a constituent who hadn't voted Labour, who'd been complaining about her bin collection, and he had suggested that perhaps she ought to croak before the next council elections. He also said he had a vision of somebody who had been calling for more cycle lanes in the area being mown down by a heavy goods vehicle, and he made comments which could easily be interpreted as racist and sexist about Diane Abbott and Angela Rayner, respectively. Now, somebody who'd worked for him and had been a councillor locally for 9 years, Oliver Ryan, was elected as a Labour MP for Burnley, beat the Conservatives back in 2024, and he was a member of this WhatsApp group. Now, he made some comments which have been interpreted as being disrespectful towards the sexuality of another Labour MP, for example, and also joining in and apparently seemed to be laughing through various emojis about some of the unacceptable comments that had been made by fellow group members, including Andrew Gwynn. So Oliver Ryan this afternoon is meeting the Chief Whip. Party sources say that no sanctions off the table. It's certainly possible that he could join Andrew Gwynn in being suspended from the Labour Party. We have to wait the outcome of that meeting. But what the Conservatives are saying is, hang on a minute, there's also Labour councillors and Labour activists in this group as well. What action are you taking against them? Why weren't they calling out this unacceptable behaviour over the course of 3 years. Now, both Oliver Ryan and Andrew Gwynn, I should say, have apologised. Labour's keen to move on. They've appointed a replacement for Andrew Gwynn as Public Health Minister, Ashley Dalton, who won the 2023 West Lancashire by-election. But I don't think this story is necessarily going to be put to bed just yet. We don't know if further messages are going to be published by the newspapers concerned, by the Daily Mail, and we don't yet know if the party is going to take disciplinary action against anyone else. I asked them this earlier and they said they were investigating the WhatsApp messages, but they did not confirm they were investigating some of the councillors who are also part of this group, in which Andrew Gwynn was leading member.
OK, thank you very much. Ian, Natasha, it's incredibly embarrassing, isn't it? You know, you want to move on, but this is appalling.
I find it massively disappointing and completely unacceptable. I can't defend. I'm glad that the Prime Minister took decisive action and just said this is unacceptable, it can't happen, and you know, somebody's lost their job. I think the wider investigation that's underway is welcome.
Do you think Oliver Ryan should now be suspended from the Labour Party?
Well, I'm glad that all options are on the table. I don't know kind of his role in this. I wasn't part of that WhatsApp group. I haven't seen it sort of unfold in real time, so I don't really know about anything about that detail. But I'm glad every option is on the table, and I'll await the kind of results of that investigation and see where we go from there.
Lewis, what do you think should happen next?
I mean, these are shocking comments in this WhatsApp group. And when the Labour government removed the winter fuel payment from pensioners, my own nan even said to me, I think the Labour government's trying to kill pensioners off. And now we've had a former government minister put in a WhatsApp group exactly that. I mean, it's just shocking comments, and there should be a full investigation as to what's happened.
And I mean, you know, you sort of think, what on earth was he thinking? I mean, anyone who's on a WhatsApp group these days knows that it's potentially public, isn't it?
Well, this is what's so, tricky and interesting about this. Obviously, the comments are vile. They reflect the kinds of thinking that you would hope just didn't exist, especially in the party that's supposed to be, good and nice and progressive to more vulnerable people in society. But I do think there's a free speech issue here at the centre of it, which is that if we no longer have a society in which people, including those in government, can communicate, where they can't communicate in any textual form, off the record, in private, without the fear of it becoming, public, essentially, then I think that has actually quite damaging effects on quite a few things. As I say, free speech and free thought, and I think it is important for people, including politicians, to have so-called safe spaces for communication that aren't just verbal. There has to be a way of, and we all know that, and I'm in no way excusing, I mean, these are particularly vicious, inexcusable kind of schoolyard, but kind of more sinister, obviously, because of the position of power. But I do think we all know that we say things in forums that are informal, that are completely different. If somebody went through my WhatsApp or my Facebook Messenger.
Get your phone later.
And it would be, it would present a picture of me that I would not want presented indefinitely.
Honest,
I think it would be the same for anyone, though.
I mean, this did come up a bit during the COVID inquiry and the pandemic, government
which is just
through
to say
WhatsApp.
That it may be that, we have reached post-COVID this time when actually they are foolish for having thought WhatsApp was a private domain, and that is maybe true. But I do think there's a bigger issue of paranoia stalking the land, where is there going to be anywhere where you can say things that are not in the polished dictum of political jargon.
Sonia, do you think that's a fair point? I mean,
I think there's a difference between private WhatsApp spaces, for example, with very close friends or family members, and then a WhatsApp group that you're on with Labour councillors, like other elected representatives, or, a forum that you're using, for example, to communicate with other employees in a job. That does feel very different.
Semi-professional, really.
Yes, I think that is very different, and I think it is crazy for an MP to put statements that they know would be very embarrassing if they were in the public domain on a WhatsApp group with other elected officials. It's just, as well as you say, the viciousness and nastiness and racism and misogyny of some of the messages that were sent.
OK, now before we move on, just a reminder that we are on at the earlier time of 11:15 on Wednesday for all the build-up to Prime Minister's questions, when Keir Starmer will, of course, be taking questions from the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch. Do join us then. But now, have a little look at this.
Prends ensuite tous les cheveux qui restent sur le côté droit.
Bien joué.
C'est assez bien fait, ça m'a plutôt fait rire. Mais plus sérieusement, avec l'intelligence artificielle, on peut faire de très grandes choses. Changer la santé, l'énergie, la vie dans notre société.
Now, in case you hadn't quite realised what was going on there, that's Emmanuel Macron, of course, the French president. He is hosting an AI summit in Paris today, and obviously they're showing deepfake, what can happen, amusing on one side, but obviously could have other repercussions which are a little bit more negative. Zoe Kleiman is the BBC's technology editor, and she is there. So Zoe, tell us, what is the discussion about? I think this is building on something actually that Rishi Sunak, we had an AI summit here in this country, didn't we? They're obviously trying to bring up these issues again.
Tensions are bubbling away here at the Grand Palais behind me in Paris, where tech bosses and world leaders from 80 different countries are gathering together to talk about AI. And the reason that there's tension is that they're trying to collaborate on some of the big issues that AI gives us. You know, its impact on jobs, its impact on the environment, its impact on everybody's lives, on society. But they're also fiercely competing because they all want to dominate this lucrative and powerful AI race. What has changed since November 23, when they met for the first time at Bletchley Park in the UK, I think, is there's been quite a big U-turn from the AI companies saying, please regulate us. We want regulation. We want to be brought into the fold. We want to work with governments. There's distinctly a backlash going on here. I've heard so much criticism in the 24 hours that I've been here about the EU's AI Act, which has just come in and is a really comprehensive bit of legislation aimed at regulating the use of AI. I've heard lots of people saying it's gone too far, it's stifling innovation. Europe needs to smooth the way, one person told me, for AI businesses to operate more freely here. Peter Kyle is here, the technology secretary from the UK, and his message is very clear. He wants investment. He's saying we want AI in Britain, we want AI companies to invest in us, we want to adopt the technology, we want to see it used in public life, we want to see it do things like make more efficiencies and save money within the NHS. He says it's just as dangerous for the UK to act too slowly as it is to act too quickly when it comes to developing this technology.
Thank you very much, Zoe. There in Paris. There's the issue of regulation on the one side, but I don't know if you agree with this, but when you talk to friends and family about this, everyone wants to talk about how's it going to affect my life? How is it going to affect jobs in particular?
I agree. I think there used to be a sort of school of thought that people found AI too complicated and didn't want to talk about it. But I think, you know, where it's, you know, people have used chatbots or whatever to sort of get answers to questions and realise the power of it. I think that's when people have started to understand what it's capable of. And look, we've got massive opportunities here in the UK to apply it to things like healthcare, around, you know, things around cancer treatment, spotting that early. And I don't think there's anybody that would disagree that is going to be great for all of humanity and for how we live our lives. But I sit on the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, so we have concerns around things like copyright for content creators and how AI uses that content to power its engine, you know, and we're concerned around if your content creators can hold on to that sort of consent before it's being used, and to make sure that ultimately that they still get paid for the stuff that they're contributing to this race. But I think it's really exciting that the UK could be at the forefront of this, the way we apply these technologies to our daily lives. But I do hope the government listens to content creators around things like copyright and the way forward.
Lewis, what do you think? Because there are people who are extremely worried about the effect this might have on jobs.
I mean, look, it's an important industry. I think we should try and be at the forefront of that. Of course, we've got to have regulation around the deep fakes. I was just remembering back about that deep fake that came out about Keir Starmer when he was at the Labour Party conference. Now, if you didn't know that was a deep fake, I mean, I listened to it, I thought that was him until it came out that we've disproved it and it's a deep fake. So there's got to be stuff so we can combat all the misinformation around the deep fakes and what have you. But the government's rhetoric around economic growth, and we want to be at the forefront of this, the national insurance increases for this sector alone is a tax of 1.6 billion. So we're saying we want to be at the forefront of this. We want to go to all of these conferences. We want to encourage business growth. We want to encourage AI, and then we slap a big tax on it. That's not the best way to create economic growth and to get this industry thriving in the UK.
Sonia, what's the part of this that either excites you or concerns you?
Well, I think the exciting thing are those big payoffs around healthcare, for example, that we might see. And that is exciting. I also think, though, it's a technology that comes with huge risks, not just in terms of people's jobs, not just in terms of misinformation, but, for example, how it might be used by terrorists and people who want to do us harm. And I think, I'm sorry to be the doomsayer on this panel, everything's all so difficult wherever you look. But the tricky thing about it is people really don't have the first clue how to regulate this technology, AI. I mean, we haven't even really figured out how to properly regulate social media platforms yet, let alone AI, which are kind of, take that problem and put it on steroids. So I think, like with a lot of very fast, rapid technological development, there are going to be big upsides, there are going to be massive downsides and risks, and we are only just starting to get our heads around it.
Do you agree that global leaders, do you think they know what they're doing when it comes to this?
I mean, I think if you wanted to have a recipe for how to not successfully control something like AI, it would be to get a bunch of global leaders together in Paris to decide how to do it. I think Sonia's point is actually bang on about the harm potentially through people who wish us ill. We know that countries like China are surging ahead with AI that have left the West in the dust, and there's a very real risk that rogue regimes can really kind of undermine us. I think on an everyday level, though, it's interesting because AI is now just this buzzword that is being used all the time, and it is so general. And sometimes I think it's being used as a kind of synonym for the internet. So I think people are a bit unclear on what AI is this thing that does everything. Well, what exactly does it do in most people's everyday lives? And I think a lot of people think, well, I use it for ChatGPT, and I write my essays that way and stuff.
But it feels quite limited at the moment.
Well, it's a little bit, but I think there is an issue there, which is, again, this issue of creativity, and are writers and artists going to be phased out by it? Journalists, exactly. But I think there's also a risk that we already think, oh, AI is right. These large language models are so quick to learn, they get everything right. But actually they don't. When you ask an AI a question, quite often it's wrong or it embeds errors in that. And I think what scares me is if we're using this stuff to fact check or to kind of support arguments, and we say, well, look, it's crunched the whole internet, it knows everything, and it hasn't, and it's gotten it wrong. I've tested this out on quite a few different AIs. That's the real problem. And I think that's where you see, look, there's still no substitute for the human analytical ability to sniff out, have I done this right, to think about evidence in certain ways. And we're just not at the stage yet where AI is this perfect thing that you can entirely trust. I have to say, my personal experience with AI is that it's a complete disaster.
But it is still the case that there
convenient.
will be certain jobs, Natasha, that will be able to be done by AI, won't there? I mean, has the government got a plan? Has the government got a plan for protecting those jobs?
I think the government has a plan to ensure that we're skilling up a workforce to be able to help with this growth in this sector. And I think that...
Are we doing it fast enough? That's the question.
I mean, that's... well, only time will tell, I'm afraid. I can't say how quickly we can turn that around. But I think looking at things, like I said, about Skills England and that sort of approach where if we're going to keep training up people quick enough to keep pace with what's going on, we need to allow them to access training a lot better. We need to be able to... People need to be able to switch between sectors and careers a lot easier than they've had to done in the past. There's no such thing as a job for life anymore, but we need to give people the skills and the ability to get that training quicker, maybe much shorter courses for a lot less money.
But it could end up changing you'd have to change the whole education system, wouldn't you?
I think there are things we could do to improve the education system to get people going through the system a better place for the world of work in the new decades that we face. I mean, look, we've got to regulate AI, but we've got to allow businesses to use it, because if we don't, we will get left behind in the global economy, which is bad for British businesses. If places like China and Russia and the United States, those big economies, get behind this more than we do, our businesses would just be priced out, which would be bad for the taxpayers in this country, bad for growth, bad for jobs. So we've got to allow businesses to use it, because we do not want to be left behind at this. We would much rather be at the forefront of this, and we need to just adapt and change the education system to get people ready for the jobs of the future.
Do you think that this country is ready for that, to take advantage of it?
I mean, I think we're probably as ready as most other countries, apart from perhaps the US, where, there's this massive homogenous market. They've got a burgeoning economy. I mean, it's always going to be hard to compete with that. We're probably as ready as, other rich, developed nations. I just think the issue is that we're probably not prepared for the risks that it comes with. And, the history, the lessons of the past are, technological change really does impact the jobs market and change the job market. It's great to hear Natasha talking about reskilling people, but no government of any colour has really got that right in the past, and that's something we need to be thinking about, because we don't want even more people economically inactive in 20 years.
OK, thank you. That's all for today. But Joe will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Thank you very much to all my guests for joining us here today.